At age 23, Rebecca Gaines seemed to have the whole world at her feet. Attractive, intelligent, and charismatic, she was the envy of many of her peers and had many friends and admirers. But Rebecca's journey had not been an easy one. She had come from poverty, with an abusive and alcoholic father who had abandoned her family when she was only 4 years old. Left with a young child to raise on her own, Rebecca's mother worked hard to provide for the family, but it never seemed to be enough. Still, even though she was raised by a single parent, Rebecca grew up in a loving home. She was a good student, did well in all of her classes, and had many friends in high school. Then, after graduating high school, through student loans and working waitressing and other odd jobs, Rebecca managed to get herself through college, graduating with a degree in English with honors from Portland State University in her hometown of Portland, Oregon. Rebecca's dream was to become a professor of English literature. She planned to go to graduate school to continue her education, but after college, with the student loans coming due and other bills beginning to pile up, she needed to get a full-time job that paid well and fast. This led her to Baby Girls, just outside of Portland. Baby Girls was an exclusive men's club, a polite term for a strip club that was very popular in the area. Taking a job as a bartender there, her natural beauty made her a popular attraction for the men who visited the club. And even though she was not a stripper, the money was good, allowing Rebecca to pay her bills and work at night while attending graduate school during the day to pursue her dream. On July 22, 2003, Ben Overton, 45, an accountant, was found dead just outside his home in Portland. He was found alone in his car in the driveway, with no signs of violence or struggle apparent. He appeared to have just come home from a night out but never made it into his house. Detectives Max Reynolds and Edwin Lee, who were at the scene, said that he appeared almost to be sleeping. However, they noticed something unusual. Overton's lips were blue, and he appeared to have a frothy substance coming from his mouth. A subsequent autopsy revealed that Overton had died of a massive heroin overdose, which commonly causes these symptoms. Less than 1 month later, on August 24th, a second victim was discovered when Matt Duff was found dead in his condo. Duff, 29, was a corporate attorney who was just starting to climb the career ladder at the large firm of Knight and Camper in Portland. He exhibited the same symptoms. His lips were blue, with froth coming out of his mouth. His death was also ruled as a massive heroin overdose. Then, less than 2 weeks later, on September 3rd, a third victim was found. Joe Ferguson, 57, a local wealthy businessman, was discovered in his office. Like the others, his lips were blue and his mouth full of froth. The cause of death was a massive heroin overdose. With 3 similar and unusual causes of death occurring within such a short time frame, detectives Max Reynolds and Edwin Lee began to wonder if there was any connection between them. They started investigating to see if they could find any link between the 3 deaths. All 3 were very well-to-do professionals with no criminal histories and no known drug use. All 3 were in good health, with none exhibiting any suicidal tendencies. All 3 were men. But other than that, there seemed to be no close connection between the 3 men. There was no evidence that any of the 3 knew each other. None of the 3 lived or worked near each other. Overton, the first victim, was a divorced father of 2, while Duff was single, and Ferguson, the latest victim, was married with 3 children. Then, as the investigation continued, things got even more complicated. On the morning of Saturday, September 27th, another victim of a massive heroin overdose was discovered. This time, it was James Anderson, a local real estate agent. Anderson, 38, was found in his car in a parking lot just outside of a local nightclub. The name of the club was Baby Girls. With this 4th death, detectives Reynolds and Lee began to suspect a pattern. They began their investigation into the latest victim's death by tracing Anderson's steps in the hours before his death. They discovered that James Anderson was last seen on the night before his death at Baby Girls, where he spent most of the night sitting at the bar. The following morning, he was found dead in his car, the victim of a massive heroin overdose. This caused the detectives to look into the possibility if there could be any connection between the other deaths and Baby Girls. They interviewed both the staff and regulars of the nightclub, showing them photos of the other 3 victims to see if anyone would recognize them. Almost everyone interviewed identified all 3 as regular patrons of Baby Girls, except Rebecca Gaines. She claimed she had never seen any of them at Baby Girls. With most of the staff and patrons of Baby Girls having identified all 4 of the victims as patrons of the club, the detectives Reynolds and Lee started to piece together a disturbing pattern. Their patronage of Baby Girls was the only common link between them. Could their involvement there have contributed to their deaths? With this discovery, the detectives began to look more closely at the club. They re-interviewed the staff, including Rebecca Gaines. Rebecca continued to deny seeing or knowing any of the four victims, but her behavior started to raise some red flags. Rebecca had always been friendly and cooperative, but now she was showing sudden bouts of irritability during questioning. As the investigation continued, the detectives began to piece together more clues. They interviewed Rebecca's colleagues again and found out more about the four victims and their interactions with the staff. Alfred had also been known to drink heavily and hit on the female staff. One of Rebecca's co-workers, Angel Fairchild, remembered a night when she overheard a very drunk Ben Overton talking to Rebecca. Stella recalled that Ben had seemed very interested in Rebecca's personal life and had asked her many questions. Another co-worker, Desiree Franklin, remembered seeing Matt Duff talking to Rebecca just a week before his death. Destiny said that Rebecca seemed very charming and friendly with Matt, which was typical of her behavior with the club's patrons. Other staff remembered seeing Rebecca in deep conversation with James Anderson at the bar on the night before he was found dead outside of the club. These interactions directly contradicted Rebecca's statements. She was not initially considered a suspect, only a witness, but this caused the detectives to be puzzled. Was there something that she was hiding? As a result, the detectives Reynolds and Lee began to focus more on Rebecca. They re-interviewed her colleagues at Baby Girls and discovered that Rebecca had a darker side. She had exhibited a pronounced and growing resentment towards men, especially those who objectified her at the club. Many of her co-workers recalled times when Rebecca seemed overly friendly with certain patrons, but they also remembered her making derogatory statements against them. The detectives also started looking into Rebecca's background. They found out about her difficult childhood with an abusive, alcoholic father and a mother who struggled to provide for the family. Rebecca had worked hard to get through college, graduating with honors from Portland State University. She had dreams of becoming an English professor. She made everyone believe she was just a hardworking student and bartender, but underneath, she was hiding a much darker side. The detectives also spoke to some of Rebecca's friends from college. One friend, Sarah Rosehill, remembered Rebecca talking about how unfair life was and how much she hated men who abused women. Another friend, Emily Norris, recalled Rebecca telling her about all of her disappointing relationships with men and how she would love to give some payback to all of the men in her life who had hurt her. In addition, the detectives discovered that Rebecca had a fascination with true crime. She often talked about famous cases and seemed to know a lot about forensic science. This made the detectives wonder if she was using this knowledge to cover her tracks. With each new piece of evidence, the detectives' suspicions grew stronger. They knew they had to act quickly if they were to prevent Rebecca from hurting anyone else. They started watching her more closely, following her movements and listening to her conversations. As a result of this surveillance, the detectives then began to gather more evidence linking Rebecca to the deaths. They discovered some indication that Rebecca had been buying large quantities of heroin, the same drug that had killed all four of the victims. But in order to make a case stick against her for murder, the detectives needed more concrete evidence that would directly link her to the crimes. Hey, interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like our content and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories. Do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Until then, stay safe. The detectives were getting closer to finding out the truth. They began to suspect that Rebecca might be involved in the deaths of Ben, Matt, Joe, and James. They started watching her more closely and gathering more evidence. They theorized that Rebecca had been using her knowledge of true crime and forensic science to cover her tracks. She was meticulous in her planning and had left very few clues, yet they were determined to bring Rebecca to justice and put an end to the string of mysterious deaths. The investigation was becoming more intense, and the detectives knew they had to move fast before Rebecca could disappear or cause more harm. As the detectives Reynolds and Lee gathered all this information, they began to see a clearer picture. They believed Rebecca used her charm to get close to her victims, then gave them drinks spiked with heroin. Overdoses of heroin are usually slow-acting, taking about 1 to 3 hours to take effect, which could explain why one of the four victims actually died near the club. The stage was set for a dramatic conclusion as the detectives closed in on Rebecca, ready to uncover the full extent of her crimes and bring her to justice. However, by the time she was questioned for a second time by the detectives, Rebecca began to realize that the authorities were onto her. She became more paranoid and knew that it was only a matter of time before the detectives would arrest her. As they closed in on Rebecca, the detectives got a search warrant for her apartment. On the afternoon of November 4th, 2003, while Rebecca supposed to be in a class, the detectives entered her apartment. There, they discovered a large hidden stash of heroin and syringes. They also found a notebook where Rebecca had written about her feelings of anger and hatred towards men. One entry read, "They think they can treat me like that? I'll show them, and that's the last time that pig will ever grope a woman." Another said, "They all deserve what they get. No one will suspect me." These entries showed the detectives just how dangerous Rebecca was. But Rebecca realized the detectives were onto her and was one step ahead of them. She had installed a security camera in her apartment, and when she saw detectives enter her home, she knew that it was only a matter of time before they caught her. In an act of rage mixed with revenge, she activated a desperate plan to escape. That very morning, before the club opened, Rebecca went to Baby Girl's with a can of gasoline. She poured it around the club and set it on fire. The flames quickly spread, and soon the whole building was engulfed in fire. The fire department arrived quickly and managed to put out the fire, but the club was a complete loss. Only charred cinder blocks remained. And while staff and patrons wondered who could have done this, the detectives already knew. They found traces of gasoline and knew the fire was set on purpose. They also found Rebecca's fingerprints on a gasoline can found outside of the club, giving them the final piece of evidence they needed. Rebecca didn't stick around to see the aftermath. Once she had set the fire, she immediately headed for Canada, hoping to start a new life and avoid capture. But she didn't stop there. Rebecca knew she needed to keep moving to stay ahead of the authorities. Over the next 13 months, she moved constantly, always careful to keep one step ahead of the authorities. From Canada, she traveled to Cuba and then Mexico, blending in with tourists and locals. She stayed in Mexico for a few weeks before making her way to Costa Rica. In Costa Rica, Rebecca found a job at a surf shop in a small beach town. She dyed her hair, wore glasses, trying to change her appearance. She hoped the laid-back lifestyle and constant flow of tourists would help her stay hidden. She also studied Spanish, trying to blend in with the locals. For a while, it seemed to work. Rebecca settled into her new life, always looking over her shoulder, but trying to stay under the radar. But meanwhile, Detectives Reynolds and Lee in the United States had not given up on her case. They were determined to find her. They worked with international authorities to track her down. After more than a year of searching, they found out that Rebecca had traveled to Canada, Cuba, Mexico, and then to Costa Rica. They knew they were getting closer to catching her. One day in early March of 2005, a tourist at the surf shop noticed Rebecca. The tourist, an American named Jane Meyer, thought she looked familiar. Jane was from Portland and had seen news reports about Rebecca. She remembered the details of the case and realized that the woman working at the surf shop might be the fugitive. Jane contacted the local authorities, who then got in touch with the U.S. detectives. The detectives were excited to finally have a solid lead. They flew to Costa Rica to confirm Jane's tip and to work with the local police to plan Rebecca's capture. The detectives watched Rebecca for a few days, making sure they had the right person. They saw her going to work at the surf shop and returning to her small apartment. Everything matched the description they had of her. With this realization, they knew that it was time to make their move. Early on the morning of March 24, 2005, the detectives, along with the local police, surrounded Rebecca's apartment. They knocked on the door and called out her name. At first, Rebecca didn't respond. She was scared and didn't know what to do. But she knew that she couldn't run anymore. Rebecca opened the door and saw the police standing there. She knew it was over. The detectives arrested her and, after her extradition was approved in Costa Rica, brought her back to the United States to face trial. During the trial, the prosecution led by ADA Hillary Johnson presented all the evidence they had gathered. They showed surveillance footage, along with the heroin, syringes, and the notebook with Rebecca's angry entries that they had recovered from her apartment. They also had witnesses testify about Rebecca's past behavior and her interest in true crime. Rebecca's defense tried to argue that she was not in her right mind because of her traumatic childhood. They said that her father's abuse and her mother's struggles had left her deeply scarred. But the jury was not convinced. They believed that Rebecca knew exactly what she was doing when she committed the murders. On August 8, 2005, Rebecca Gaines was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The families of the victims felt some relief knowing that justice had been served, but they also felt the indelible pain of their loss. Detectives Reynolds and Lee also felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing they had stopped a dangerous killer and brought peace to the victims' families. Rebecca Gaines's story became a cautionary tale. It showed how a bright and promising young woman could turn her hurt and anger into something horrible, into becoming a serial killer. The story of Rebecca Gaines would be remembered for years to come, a shocking example of how deeply hidden anger and trauma can lead to unimaginable actions.